Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. President. Good evening to all of you. I hope all of you and your families are doing well as we continue to work through the pandemic and try to do the best we can to meet the needs of all of our citizens and those in our community. So great to see everybody. Just a couple things before we get into specific properties. I just wanted to first thank you for 2 weeks ago. I know this item was on the agenda. I had a conflict, and I appreciate you kicking it off until this meeting. I really wanted to be here. There's a number of important properties that I know merit a great deal of discussion, and I wanted to make sure that I was here for that. So I appreciate you pushing it off to allow me to be here for this meeting this evening. I think Kurt Bellavance is also, is he on the Zoom?
Yes, he is, sir.
Okay, great. So Kurt is with me as well. There may be there'll be opportunities for him to jump in as well on some of these properties. Another thing too, before we get into specific properties, I did want to say that with all of these, I welcome all of your input and ideas and suggestions. Some of these are newer properties that we're discussing. Others have certainly been around for a couple of years. Some have even been longer than that. And a great deal of work has gone on to try to find the right type of project. But I certainly welcome any ideas, inputs, thoughts, or suggestions on any of these projects. And again, just to be clear, my responsibility as mayor is I have the ability to put any city-owned property out for an RFP, a request for proposals. That allows me to put it out through our purchasing agent. Dan Doucette typically handles that, puts it out to the public at large for bids on the property. Once those bids come in after a set period of time, then we have the opportunity to speak to those bidders, and then if there's something that we think could work, then we bring it forward to the City Council. You folks are the voting authority to allow my office, me as mayor, to sign any purchase and sale agreement to begin the process of potentially selling a property. So none of that can happen. There's been no agreements. I know we've received phone calls on a couple of these properties, but there's been no agreements, no discussion in terms of trying to work out a deal. And everything has to be done through an RFP, open to any potential bidder, that anybody could potentially purchase the property. And then it all has to come to the council to allow me to sign a purchase and sale agreement to move forward. So with that, I'm ready to talk on a number of these properties. And Mr. Chairman, do you want me to just kind of go down the list, or are the specific ones we want to discuss first? What do you think would be the best way to go forward?
Whatever you're best at, whatever you feel comfortable doing, let's cover them all. Great. Go right down the list, please.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, yeah, I think this is a great opportunity for us to go through these properties. Some might be new to you. Some of these have been around, as I said, for a long time, and have been sources of discussion now for years. So the first one, Willowbray Park, that's come forward. A couple of people reached out, a couple of members here on the board, as potential property that could be of interest to potential buyers. Willowbray Road, I think all of you know, is single family, very nice neighborhood. It's off of Pearlie. Pearlie connects into Willowbray, and at the end of Willowbray, there is an area that was used as parkland before. When I was younger, Willowbray was a pretty active park. That was a part of our park programs, and over time it just hasn't been utilized. I think at one point there was a basketball net there, but it really is not an active park. There's it just hasn't been utilized in a number of years. It is not parkland. That was one thing we did have to look up and explore. It is not parkland, which has its own sort of restrictions on it. This is city-owned property, and we have the ability to sell this property to potential single-family homes should we desire. Kurt and I have hired a surveyor, and that's going to be for a number of these properties that you're going to hear. The survey has been working now for a few weeks. We were hoping to have maybe a couple of reports in, but we do not have them in just yet. But one of the properties was Willowbray Park area, and we're looking at least one, maybe a couple of parcels that could be sold for single-family homes. So that is where we are right now. I think that this would be a good opportunity. I think there'd be great value in selling a couple of properties for single-family development in that area, and I think we'd get a pretty good price for it. But we have a surveyor now determining how much space we have there, how many units could potentially, or properties could potentially go into that area, and then we also need some appraisal work on that. I haven't asked for an appraisal yet until I wanted to make sure we knew what the site could hold in terms of single-family homes. But it's beautiful homes up in that neighborhood. I think all of you have seen it and been in that area, and I think we could add some nice single-family homes at the end of that street, kind of in a cul-de-sac type of manner.
Why don't you go right down the list, Mr. Mayor? If there's any questions anyone can ask at the end, please.
Okay. Kylie School. Kylie School is certainly one that has been a major topic of mine and the superintendent and all of us, school committee, city council. And quite frankly, the Kylie School I see as being a kind of a central figure, central spot in the future plans for our city. I will say it was a year ago. I had a appraisal done on the property. It came back that we could, the appraised value was $2.6 million for the school itself, and then I think it was up to $3.1 million if we were to sell the field and the park in the back. That is on Johnson. I think everybody's obviously very familiar. It used to be the school administrators. And we did explore that to try to get a sense of what that number would be. Quite frankly, I was hoping that it would be a little bit more for that, for potential sale of that property. When we did a review of bringing that school building back to life, that was done by Tim Healy 2 years ago. We had a company come in to do a full evaluation of the property, all the internal systems, handicap accessibility, the roof, everything to bring that back. The gymnasium is in real rough condition. And we were told at that time it would be between 11 and 12 million. Certainly the costs have gone up a bit, but that would be where we are in order to bring that building back to be certified usable school space. Certainly it's always a difficult decision whether or not to sell school property. Our numbers have been pretty steady over the last several years. However, certainly with a lot of development that's being proposed in the city, and it just continues to be housing proposals, one after another coming in, that our numbers could go up. We certainly have a number of schools, particularly our elementary schools, that are at or very near capacity, and it's always a difficult decision to potentially sell an existing school. Right now, as you know, we have the Welch School is going through the process with the MSBA for a project over at that site. We are looking at a work to the building, the base building, which is new windows and new heating and cooling systems, new univents, similar to what we've done over the last few years at the McCarthy School and the Burke School. I think all of us, that was a unanimous vote to all move forward with learning what we could about the Welch School and what the needs would be. I know Councilor McGinn and Councilor Melville are on that committee and have been part of those meetings. And those meetings have been taking place almost on a weekly basis. We've hired Doran Whittier. They are the owner's project manager. Very knowledgeable group, very enjoyed working with them. And the architect designer for the work is Danisco Design, who very familiar with the city of Peabody. They just helped us with the Higgins Middle School and did a terrific job. So our team is in place. Our team has been approved by the MSBA, and the architect Danisco Design was just approved 2 weeks ago with the MSBA at a meeting. So right now we are doing the due diligence and looking at our potential options. One of the options, as I said, was to use to just do the project to that existing building. The other option would be to potentially do an addition renovation, which would potentially add some classes to that building, which might be necessary depending on some redistricting that is going to be taking place very shortly, hopefully, and also some projects that have been proposed. But I think the Welch School, the Center School, and the Kylie School are all very tied and connected. And the reason for that is the Center School, I think, as all of you know, is a school that's in desperate need of some real work. That site is a little tighter than the Welch School site, but I think a major project has to take place at the Center School. It's not the oldest school in the city. The South Memorial School is actually the oldest, but the Center is the second oldest, and I would say that it is in the most need of significant work. And then we also have the Kylie School being available to us, potentially as swing space, potentially as an investment should our numbers go up. So I've been a little hesitant at this point to move forward with requests to go ahead and sell the Kylie, which we certainly have the ability to do. It would give us some short-term funds, but again, may cause some longer range issues for us. What I'm thinking of doing, and certainly open up to thoughts and ideas on this, is just to hold off until we have the set plan and vote for the Welch School. That should be done sometime in the spring, where we have the final design and votes would be taken in terms of what the cost would be and what the final design would be, whether it's just a rehab of the existing building, doing the base work necessary to that building, or perhaps some additional classrooms. And obviously, that will depend which project we go with will be heavily directed by funds that we may have. The Center School is also, we've petitioned, submitted our application to the MSBA as well as the high school. So I think these next year or two, depending on what happens with the high school request, what happens with our Center School request, and what happens with our type of project we go at, the middle school, the Welch School, I think all factors into the future of the Kylie School. And I think that should be kind of come into focus here over the next few months, because we have to make a final decision on the Welch, and we have to kind of set our course. So that's kind of where we are with the Welch, the Kylie School. I think it's connected to all the other schools, and decisions will have to be made. The Woodlot Fire Station, quite frankly, I don't see that as usable space. It's right behind the fire station and in West Peabody over on Lowell Street, and there's some space there. It's a pretty good sized lot. I just don't see how it could be accessed with our fire station behind it, and I think that would be a very difficult lot to potentially sell and have some sort of development, a couple of homes or whatever the case may be. That's not really on my radar, but certainly open up to any thoughts you may have. Similar to 6 Elginwood and 0 Elginwood, both single-family lots. Those are being surveyed to see what we can potentially do. Elginwood is right off of Lake Street, kind of near the entrance to where you go for some parking for the Kennedy Fields. And Elginwood Road is in that back area, and there could be potential sites for single-family homes or a duplex in that area. Certainly open to that, but I don't have any further information from the surveyor on that. Former PMLP building, long history. Obviously, I know all of us are very familiar with that. We did put out an RFP a couple of years ago. There was one bidder that came forward with a proposal for 18 units. They would keep the existing building as it is. 18 units, 3 floors, 6 units each floor. And they had a parking plan that met our requirements. We had a neighborhood meeting. A number of you were at that meeting. There was some opposition to it, and that project was just held because of other projects that were taking place. Certainly there's been a lot of proposed development in that King Street, Lowell Street, Endicott area. There's another property to be discussed next, the DPS site on Berry Street. That's certainly another one that has generated a significant amount of interest. I probably get calls on that on a monthly basis from developers who are very interested in the Berry Street site. But it is always large residential development, always. I haven't had a proposal come my way in a significant amount of time for commercial development. It is all residential all the time. People are trying to build homes in the city, build large condos and apartment developments. As all of you know, that's just how it is right now. I'm told the economy is very much in favor of investing in those type of projects through banks and lenders. And certainly it is very much a priority of Governor Baker and the state to add housing. Berry Street is a lot that I've always felt could potentially be a development site, but and there's a great deal of land we own there. It'd be nice to clean up that site, which is in pretty rough condition where the DPW building was, or is. We have our buses parked there as well. That's busing parking in that location. But right now, if I were to put it out for an RFP, I think there would be significant interest, but it would be large residential development. And that's what would come if we did put that out. PMLP building, there was a plan some years ago, which I actually liked. It was for 8 units in kind of a duplex form, kind of similar to what's on Drake Way now. And we put that out for bid. There was one bidder, and then that bidder dropped out because of the costs of remediating that site, which does have some contamination. And that's always been a source of concern. That cleanup of that contamination would cost several $100,000, and I think that's a conservative number. And that's held back some significant investment. We haven't put the RFP back out yet. I would like to at some point, but with everything with King Street and the proposals on further down on Endicott Street, I just haven't wanted to put that up until maybe we had a discussion and I could get some input from all of you. 2 Washington Street. Again, we've put out 2 RFPs on 2 Washington Street. There's always been a great deal of interest in that building. Frustrating, certainly, because I've gotten a number of calls, people very interested in that site, the beauty of the site, the location, and the history of the site, I think, is very appealing to many people. But we've put it out, an RFP out twice, trying to focus just on commercial only, and we have not received any bidders. Again, people primarily have been looking at that site as an opportunity for residential development, and I haven't wanted to move forward with residential development in that site until maybe we had a greater discussion and there was more input on that. And again, the costs to bring that building back to life, I think, are pretty significant, and it would have to be the right type of developer and right type of project that I think could work for us. Again, if we didn't do what we did, the 2 Washington Street, and I will stand by that action we took and that vote that was taken, that if we didn't do that, we would have I think the numbers were 80 to 100 units of affordable housing. The building would have been taken down, the tree would have been taken down, and we would have a big block building there. And I don't want to speak for everyone, but I'm pretty sure that none of us project. So the 2 Washington Street has certainly had a long-winded history here, but if we didn't do the action we did, we would be looking at a big block building there. And again, I don't think that would have fit in with what we're hoping for and what we all want. I haven't put that property back out for bid yet. I've flirted with the idea, but again, because of the pandemic and a lot of people just holding pat where they are right now, holding steady, I think there's going to be much interest in doing major projects for at least a little while longer until things shake out and hopefully improve for us in terms of the pandemic and our corona numbers. 12 and 16 Washington. That is one where actually a little bit of work has taken place. We hired a surveyor to come and do an analysis of 12 and 16 Washington. Specifically, I wanted to explore the opportunity of potentially selling them as separate lots. Selling 12, which is the church lot, and the parking area. 16 is kind of the former rectory building for the church, and is now a building that we of course own, and it's some rental units over there. So that is, I'm hoping to have that report very shortly to see how it could potentially be where we could maybe subdivide it and look at other options for a project that would fit with us. And I think it could a way for us to generate more money from that property by subdividing. So that has yet to be determined. 10 Lowell Street, another property that's had a long history here, and I'll rehash a bit of it the experiences we've had with this property. This was a property we purchased, and I want to make sure I know the... We purchased in 2017, the end of 2017, and at that time, we had all the tenants at that building all had plans to go to other locations. The big spaces at that location were Brody's, which is still there, as all of you know, and the Next Mex Thing. The Next Mex Thing went over down the street further down on Main Street, and by all accounts has been a great success over in that area, and very pleased with the move. The idea at the time, or the plan at the time, was that Brody's was going to be relocating to Main Street as well. But unfortunately, fell apart and didn't move forward, and Brody's has been open ever since, paying us rent, and we're the landlord and property owner. Quite frankly, I haven't moved on this because I've been trying to be fair to a long-time existing business here who has been a part of our downtown for a number of years, and haven't moved forward with moving forward with our plan, which when I presented it to you back at the end of 2017, early 2018, we were going to take down the building, do some flood renovation or flood remediation work, beautify that area, and put potentially a George Peabody statue or something honoring our city's history in that location. That was the plan at the time. I still love that idea. And the funds for that purchase was from community preservation, $185,000, and then $250,000 was taken from the sale of property account, which is an account we have, again, for the sale and purchase of property. We have a little bit of money in that account. There are no requirements in terms of the future of that site. We're not held to anything in terms of what potential plans for that site may be, whether we move forward with what the original plan was or if we look at other options. We're not held back by any of the requirements for the funding that we used. It was open space funding, and that gives us some flexibility as to what we may want there. So I'm very much open to ideas and suggestions and thoughts on that parcel. Again, I've always just been struggled with taking action. I know the owner of Brody's has looked at other opportunities. He very much wants to be a part of Peabody. He's looked at other sites in Peabody Square, and it just hasn't quite seemed to work. And certainly, I'm torn because I want to be fair to the Peabody businesses, existing businesses, but I also know that I presented all of you with a plan, very detailed plan as to what the site was going to be, and it was unanimously approved that we were going to go forward with that plan. So that's kind of torn at me a bit, and certainly looking for any input or ideas or suggestions that you may have. I think I got all of them, and certainly willing and open and available to talk more on any of those specific properties. I did all the talking, but I know Kurt Bellavance could have given quite a deal of that information as well. Some predated his work with us as Community Development Director. Karen Sawyer was involved in a great deal of this. And, but that's where we stand. Certainly these last several months have kind of put a lot of things on hold. We've been trying to do some background work with the surveying and some appraisal work that I want to do to try to figure out where we're at, so when we are ready and the market might be better, that we can take advantage of this, because I do think there's some significant opportunities to generate and bring in some money, which would certainly be helpful to all of us. So with that, Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, I'm ready for any questions on any of these sites, and willing, if there's other sites that you wanted, there were questions about, certainly willing to try and help with that as well.
Thanks for your input. Mr. Bellavance, I'm sure you'll be, you didn't get the floor right now, but you'll be asked questions as we go. It's open to any councilors, and unfortunately, there is not like the other Zooms that we've been using when we're all on Zoom. There is raise your hand button, but Mr. President, I'm going to ask if you can please cue me up as to who is interested in speaking, please.
Will do, Councilor Gould. Any councilors wish to speak at this time? Councilor Charest.
Thank you, Council President. Through Chairman Gould to the mayor. On a couple of those properties, you said that we have an income, rental income, I believe, on Washington Street, 16 Washington Street. Am I correct? We just said that?
Yes, I think, as I look at the list here, I think 3 of these properties are income generating right now. 10 Lowell Street, the Brody's Pub is paying rent. They have been since we purchased the property. And then also, the church is being rented by another church, and they pay us rent, as well as we have some rental units at 16 Washington. All 3 are really just pretty much paying the costs. You know, all 3 are not in great condition, and if we intend to keep those properties longer, we will have to do some work to those properties. But right now, they are income generating, more or less paying the utility costs and some other items.
If I may, that was my question was, what is the type of numbers that we're looking at? Are we getting fair market rate for these? So, as you spoke, there is some maintenance that we need to probably put into these buildings. Are we getting anything that we can escrow into for the maintenance that are, so again, is it market rate or is it below market rate?
I haven't had an analysis done to determine exactly. You know, I would guess that, because we haven't raised the rent on anybody since we took the property over, just trying to help people. You know, we haven't raised the rent on the church or on the rental units or with Brody's Pub since we took over a couple of years ago. And certainly the last 7 months, that's not something I've really wanted to entertain. So I would guess that maybe we're slightly below market, but we haven't done an analysis.
But it's not costing us besides, I guess we don't have a mortgage on any of these properties. But
No, that's a good question. No, we don't have a mortgage on any of the properties. They've been all paid for. The income we bring in is typically just going to pay some costs. I think there's a little bit of money that we've been able to bring in. But yeah, with the condition of some of these buildings, you know, we're going to have to, it'll end up having to cost us some money to do some renovation work should we continue to hold on to these properties.
thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Sharis. President Rosendahl, please.
Councilor O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mayor Bedcourt, for coming tonight and giving us a great summary of these properties. I guess just in general, the Willowbray Park, I think something should be done there in terms of looking at it. It's kind of in a quasi disrepair, as you noted. You know, it's just been decommissioned. There's still a basketball court, nothing else, and just some woods, and it's kind of a cut through. My wife would probably publicly throttle me because she would like to have it be, you know, remain woods or whatnot. But I think in some cases we have to figure out what we want to do with it as a city, whether looking at homes or whatnot. But to be clear, I've not spoken to any of the residents, and I know we're just in the initial stages, but it's just something I wanted to comment that right now it's kind of in this, it's not really being used in any way that can help either the neighborhood or the residents. We've had some issues with, you know, kids up there messing around, shall we say. Yeah. And then I guess the one question I had is regarding like 10 Lowell Street. So as I remember, it was before some of us were on the council, but it was the end of December, so I certainly attended the meeting. I remember the purchase. But as I recall, you know, I guess I don't have a firm position, but I know that the council members that were there approved it, and that it was, one of the conditions was that it was not, the property could not be used for residential or commercial, so use. So I know the intent was to be used as a park or an open space, so I think, I'm not sure why we wouldn't continue with that path, especially where it's in a flood zone or whatnot, but I just wanted to just, at least that was my understanding, just looking at some of the minutes, so I don't know, other councilors might remember or recall, but thank you.
Mr. Mayor? Any comment on that? No? Okay. Okay, thank you. Mr. President, please.
Councilor Melville.
Thank you very much. Through the chair to the mayor, just an accounting question. If any of the sales, for example, the Kylie School, any revenue from that would go to the general fund, or I know we have this. You had actually referenced it, a property, revenue from sale of property fund, but this is not something that would be line item back to the schools. It would be in the general fund for us to distribute during however you see fit through the budget process.
And that's a great question, Councilor Melville, because the best example I could give, the most recent one was when we sold the Brown School. And there's, you know, a development there now, residential development. And my recollection, I think I had just gotten on the council. This had been some time ago. It might have even, well, it was some time ago. And I thought there were a number of funds that had kind of been distributed to different projects. I think some were for sidewalks, some were for, went into the general fund, some went into some other pockets. So I'd have to go back and look. I'm sorry, I didn't look at that before this, but I thought there was a little bit of flexibility with what could be done with the money as long as the school committee and city council, discussed it and maybe made some decisions together. I'd have to look back. I'm sorry, I don't have that information.
Thank you. I just through the chair, from my perspective, I think a real point of emphasis for any of these sales is I think we need to be able to tell the public what we intend to do with that revenue as part of the balance of is it worth selling versus what's the long-term gain. I mean, when you had referenced, and I know I've been in those same meetings with you regarding the Welch, swing space, things of that nature, balancing the costs versus where that money would go versus the sale, I think is going to be very important, and I think it's important for the public to see that as well. So, with regards to any possible RFPs and sales, a major point of emphasis for me is where is that revenue? Is it line item to go to somewhere else? What do we plan to do with it? Because I look at the city's assets as a general asset line, and then we break it down from there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor.
I think you're right on with that, Councilor Melville, and I certainly know the superintendent and the school committee would love to get that any funds from any sale of school property, but that'd be a discussion for all of us to have.
Thank you, Councilor Melville. Mr. President, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, I have a couple of questions. Regarding the Willowbray property, would you be looking to retain the walking path that goes from Willowbray out to Lowell Street with that proposal of residential units there?
Yeah, I don't have a position either way. I certainly would be open to that if that fits with what potential home or two could look like and fit. I know there's a number of people that utilize that area to cut through to go to Lowell Street. So yeah, I'm not tied either way. I just think it would, whatever would be the best fit for those with that home or two and what the neighbors might want.
Thank you. Then the next one I have is regarding the Kylie School.
And what Councilor O'Neill would want.
The next one I have is regarding the Kylie School. The school committee has not deemed that surplus yet, correct?
No, we had discussions about it, and again, this was probably a year and a half ago, but we didn't make a vote to declare it surplus, no.
So the first wave of that property in particular would be the school committee would have to deem it surplus, and then it would come back before us, and then the RFP process would start, correct?
Absolutely correct.
Regarding Elginwood Road, both of those two properties, when you're looking at residential units there, I guess, and as well as Willowbray, you're not looking at zoning changes. You're looking at literally conforming to the neighborhood that's already pre-existing, correct?
Yes, that's a good point, Councilor. So yeah, we're looking at and surveying the property, that area, to find out what fits in with what's existing there. I'm not intending and looking at bringing that to you right now. That area, you go down Elginwood Road. On the left, there's single-family homes, and on the right, there are some duplexes. And but no, I wouldn't. We're trying to determine what could fit there, and that would fit in with the general neighborhood.
Thank you. And then the last question I have is regarding 10 Lowell Street. I know you had mentioned flood mitigation, and you also had mentioned receiving $185,000 from community preservation. So if we did end up reverting back to selling that property, would we then have to give back the $185,000 back to community preservation?
Yes, that would have to be something that we'd have to speak to community preservation about, but absolutely there, particularly depending on what use we have for the property, they would have first claim to that 185,000.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Councilor
Any
Sasson.
other? Thank you.
Thank you. So I'd like to make some general comments, and then I'd like to get into some of the specific properties. One question I did have, though, Mr. Mayor, was what decides, I know Main Street went up as an auction, and then we talk about request for proposal. Is there a reason why we can do an auction versus a request for proposal, just so I can understand that?
That's a very good question. So it's always kind of a strategy on the city's part as to what we think can generate the most interest and generate the most potential income to us in terms of a sale. We've gone more with the RFP because the RFP, you have the ability to kind of structure the proposal for what you want in that area. You know, maybe you want a mixed use, maybe you want single family, multifamily, whatever. You have a little more ability to structure. If you put it out on an auction, the person buys it, it's whatever is legally zoned for that. So it's just always kind of a strategy as to what you think would fit best at that particular site. The RFP gives you a little bit more flexibility, which sometimes can generate more money in, where opposed as an auction, you're just putting it out as is, it's zoned, whatever zoning area it is, and then the people would bid on it. They would only be able to use that property for that, what is allowed under that zone.
Thank you for the explanation. One of the things that concerns me, it doesn't really concern me, but I think we're in a good situation, is anything you read about is the market is red hot. You read about, because of the pandemic, people leaving the city, they want to live in the suburbs. I can tell you specifically in my neighborhood in the last 30 days, we've had 2 homes, one go for 35 to 40,000 over asking, another one go to 50 to 60,000 over asking. So I think the time is now. I think timing is of the essence, and I'd like to see us, look at some of these and do something with them, because I think, we all agree that we're going to need some money for a rainy day fund based upon some of the expenses we've incurred and some of the revenues that won't be there because of the pandemic. So I think that's critical. I'd just like to give some comments going down a couple of the properties. I'll be very frank. I will not comment on everyone. Willowbray Park, all I can say, it's a single-family lot. Single families are through the roof, as I just said. My question on the Kylie School is, you talk about the Center School and the Welch School. Would you see the Kylie School being used, put back into action if we got an agreement from the state to partner and build a brand new school, or not? Because I'm not so sure we're going to spend the money to bring it back online to use it. I'm just curious why we wouldn't go through with the Kylie School. What would we wait for?
Yep, and that's a very fair question. That's something that we're constantly debating and discussing. I've just been reluctant to, I don't want to make a mistake and give up potential school space that might be utilized in the future. I remember there a couple years ago, there was some discussions about maybe putting some pre-K, maybe putting some specialized classes at the Kylie that would free up space at the McCarthy, free up space at the Burke, free up space at the center, even the Brown, and that would allow us to put some classrooms there and really free up space in the city, or in these schools, to kind of accommodate potential growth in the city, depending on these projects that go forward. So that's really what it comes down to. I think we could make some short-term money, and I've just been reluctant to do that. That potentially could hurt the future. If we were to sell the Kylie, make some money, but then, our population grows a bit here, and we're searching for school space. I just know that could get very expensive, particularly now seeing, it's amazing, the Higgins Middle School project, which was extremely large project, ended up coming in at 86 million. To potentially add 6, 8, 12 classrooms at the Welch School, we're looking at potentially half of that. So to find school space is difficult. And that's why I've just been a little reluctant and gun shy to pull the trigger because of that fact. I don't want to do something a short-term gain that could potentially harm us in our long-term vision. So that's it. But I struggle with if I'm right on that. But that's kind of the way I'm looking at it.
Yeah, I think that's one of the more difficult ones as far as regarding the fields in the back and the park. I think at one point, I don't know where it is, I know the Peabody High School softball team, that's their home field. I think you were looking to try and get them more onto the high school property. We don't need to really get into that discussion, but I would only keep that field if you needed, if you can move them to being up at the high school and find them a park. I think that wouldn't be a bad way to go. I think the park that's there right now, I think we have enough parks, so I wouldn't have any issue with, putting them together. It would increase the price. I will say to you, and I think we've had some discussions years ago, I think it's the assisted living facility across the street. I think something like that wouldn't be a bad situation because it would put less of a stress on the services in the city. So I understand what you're saying, and then at the end of the day, it is expensive to acquire school space, but I would love to see that money, if you sold it, or maybe rather than put the 10, 11 million, 12 million into it, I'd love to put those funds towards a new high school. But I understand it's kind of it's a cup game. You got to figure out where you're going to put the people. But hopefully, I think the school committee is looking at the redistricting. Once that's done, I think that'll probably clear it up a little bit for everybody. But I do think it's something, as I said, time is money, and I think it's, I understand where you're coming from on that. I'll jump down to the former PMLP. So is that something where you had 18 units? I think I heard the neighborhood meeting, they really weren't in favor of that. Is that something that you're thinking about putting a new RFP out for? Because it was back in 2018. I think the market conditions have changed once again to our favor. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's one of the properties I was, maybe hoping for some opinions and guidance on. Yeah, I mean, that one's a property that would be ready to go out on an RFP. We have all the information in terms of heights and measurements and parking requirements and all of that. We just pulled back on the 18 units because there was some neighborhood opposition and wanted to see maybe if there might be some other options for us in the future. But I know the big concern has always been about what the cost of remediation would be. I think, truthfully, selling that property I don't think would be a huge, would net us a great deal of money, because I think all of that, any money that would come in on the purchase of that property would be offset significantly by the costs of that company to come in and do remediation work. And maybe they get a grant through us or through the state, and that could help. But that property is not a big money maker for us, truthfully. And Council, you mentioned maybe, properties that you think we should get out there. I'd love to know which ones, because that's what I'm kind of hoping for from the council, as to which ones that you think I can move on now, or ones that you should wait. I struggle with the Kylie. Kylie's a tough one for me, truthfully. That one's a struggle.
I agree, and I think that based upon the school committee and doing their due diligence, I think, you owe it. Obviously, they haven't declared a surplus, and I think it makes sense to probably wait until the spring of 2021. I hate to, as far as Willowbray Park, I'm going to defer to the Ward 6 Council, but as I said, single-family housing right now, it's sky high. I think that wouldn't be a bad one to get on the market shortly. When you put out something like the former PMLP, when you put out an RFP, can you put down, so you put out 18, but the neighborhood wants less than that, 4, 6, whatever it may be. Does the RFP, can that have a limit on the number of units? Is that legal to do that when you put out the RFP?
Yes. And in fact, when we put out, and we've done this different ways with the RFPs, but when we put out the RFP for the PMLP building on Endicott Street, we did not put a number. We left that wide open just to see what it would generate. But we didn't put a number or requested number, recommended number of units. We just put it out as a potential residential development, and we were just curious to see what would come in. So the 18 units wasn't asked for by us. That's just what came in from the bidder. But we have the ability in an RFP to put some limits on the number.
And so I would suggest that that's something that I would advise you to look into, because I think, because of the amount of discussion that's happened between Endicott Street and King Street, I think we pretty much know what the neighbors feel in those areas. So I would be in favor of an RFP with a lower number. And I know you said it's not much of a moneymaker, but I think what it does do is it finally takes a piece of dilapidated property that people have been looking at for many years and cleans it up. So I think there's a benefit twofold to do that. So I would encourage to get that out for an RFP. The former DPS site, Berry Street, I'm not going to comment on that at this particular time. It's a large piece of property, and I'm not comfortable really discussing that right now. Going back to 2 Washington Street, my question is, does that property have a liquor license attached to it?
Yes.
And what also does it have as far as, is there any parking at all?
There are about 10 spaces. And again, that's why the value of the church property was for that additional reason, to provide some additional spaces.
Absolutely. And I want to go back to some conversations we've had, and we talked a lot about millennials, and we talked a lot about the downtown. We talked a lot about building it up and bringing restaurants and bringing people to come downtown. And to me, it's all about synergy. And a perfect example is when Stanzi's came to town, Brody's was the first to admit that their business increased because of Stanzi's. They have gone on record, they said it, and it ended up being a good thing. So you have La Siesta, you have Maki Sushi, I look at that as a building where possibly you have some mixed use, whether you have some commercial and some residential. As we've said before, millennials like to stay home, they like to eat, live, stay where they are. So I look at those properties with possibly the parking, as you said it, 12 Wash Street. I think that makes a lot of sense, because I think it's tough. You're not going to get the commercial that you want out there. You haven't gotten it on the 2 RFP, so I think we have to look at being a little bit more creative. And that brings me to the final piece of property I want to discuss, which is 10 Lowell Street. Regarding 10 Lowell Street, there's nothing wrong with taking a second look and admitting that maybe the vision we had wasn't perfect. And I think that's that perfect piece of property. And I think that as far as if there's no flooding issues, and we've done a great job downtown, I look at that piece of property, as I just stated, you have to create synergy. So if you have Stanzi's, you have a parking lot, you have Brody's, and then maybe someday across the street you have another restaurant with some outdoor dining, there's your synergy, and maybe some apartments above Brody's. That's what we talk about, and I think we have opportunities to do that. And I think personally that, you know what, I think we should, it always helps to have a professional on staff. But all I'm going to say is, as far as 10 Lowell Street goes, I would not hesitate at all to put that up for auction rather than RFP. I think that's a valuable piece of property. I get asked about it on a daily basis. We all know it's got a tremendous amount of interest. There's more than a couple of parties. And, just like we made out and we got our loan paid back when we put 1 Main Street up, I would recommend to look at that and to go that route. I don't see that as being a loser. I see that as an extremely valuable piece of property. And, I think Brody's has done a tremendous job with what they did in the summer under extreme difficult circumstances. You go by there basically any night at 8 o'clock, as long as the weather's good, you can't get a seat outside. And so I think it shows that people are willing to come downtown if there's a nice place to eat, if we give them some parking. So, that's kind of, to me, the one that's, I get asked about the most. I'm sure many of you do. But, we pay back, the CPC. We find another place for George Peabody statue. But I think, a park sounded good maybe back then, but in retrospect, I think it'd be a wrong move. I think it's time to develop that piece of property. And as I said, maybe you can do something down on Washington Street. But you have to have the parking. I think the places that, across from Dunkin' Donuts, I'm sorry, Z-Woo's, unfortunately, we lost them. That parking's always been an issue over them. We've had, I don't know, half a dozen restaurants try it over there. But I think, Brody's is a landmark building. It does need to be probably torn down and rebuilt, and I'm sure whoever would buy it understands that and would, want to make it, the linchpin that it is, just like One Main Street. So I would be totally in support of getting that out there as soon as possible, once again, because of the market, and I think we'd be in a good position for that. So thank you for your time, appreciate it.
Thank you, Councilor Sasslaw. Mr. President, please.
Councilor Turco.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for the presentation. So I'll start with the easy ones. You obviously know that the ones that you mentioned with the single-family homes, the smaller lots are just a slam dunk. Sell them. The market's great. Move on with them. The same with Willowbray. I think that it only makes sense to sell those and make that into a nice cul-de-sac. As far as the Kylie School, I don't think that's a difficult decision at all. I'm surprised that there's any even thought of it. I think that we need to keep that building. I think that everybody here knows that the population in this city is increasing. There's a number of projects slated to begin in the next year, couple of years. And as far as our existing school buildings, there'll be a significant need to shuffle kids. Now, as far as the Kylie, my one reservation with the Kylie as a school building is that puts 4 elementary schools on the west side of Route 1, and that's not where the vast majority of our population is. But I digress on that because I think the need far outweighs the fact of where we place the school. I think we're all hopeful that the center school can and will be done soon. I'm not sure if there's an area where you could place students while the center school was under construction. I actually really liked the idea of the K-1 center for the Kylie. But anyway, there's so many things we could do with the Kylie. It makes no sense to get rid of that property. And for the investment that you mentioned of possibly $11 or $12 million, and I know that was 2 years ago, it doesn't sound like a huge investment. But with regards to that investment price, we've recently read in the newspaper that the Higgins came $4 million under budget. Is that tangible money, or was that just on paper we saved $4 million? My question is there $4 million available to put toward the Kylie School, or does that money not exist?
That might be a best question for Mr. Gingras. But no, my feeling, well, I'm going to let him answer if...
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. To your point, Mike, do you have an answer for Councilor Turco, please?
Sure. Good evening. No, the original budget was in the 90+ million range, and the actual costs were 86 million. So that's where the 4 million comes in, but there's no 4 million sitting around. No.
Councilor Turco.
Okay, I was hopeful that it was in an account somewhere, but that would have made this a much easier decision. But I still stand by the decision that we need to keep the Kylie School. We will use it. It's worth for $11 million, $10, $11, $12 million to renovate that school, and I think that that amount of money far outweighs the cost that we could incur without that building available to us. Is my thought on that. As far as the DPS building, it's not listed here on the property sheets. Do you know what the zoning is at the DPS building?
Could we ask Mr. Bellavance?
Through you to Mr. Bellavance. Kurt, are you aware of the zoning and what it is at the DPS site?
Good evening, Kurt Bellavance, Community Development Director. I believe if you're talking about the Berry Street lot, the former the DPS building.
Yes, Mr.
That, I believe, is R3, so it'd either be single family or multifamily. Two-family.
Okay.
Thank you, Bill Belichick. Mr. Bellavance, thank you.
Thank you very much, Kurt. So, as you know, that's 2.7 acres, so that's a lot of construction that can go on there, a lot of housing. So as far as that goes, I think you're 100% correct in that assessment that we need to find out what's going to happen with Endicott Street, what's going to happen with King Street. And I hate to sit on this property, as Councilor Sasslaw said, it's the timing is here, but my fear is that if 42 Endicott and Berry and King Street go forward to add the DPS site, Berry Street, to the mix all at once would just not go very well for us. As to Washington Street, or maybe 14 to 16 Washington, is there still any talk of the Children's Museum, or is that gone by the wayside?
No, that's been very much in play up until very recently with the, because of the pandemic, a lot of things have been put on hold. But, as we've discussed as a group in the past, that was a tremendous success. We had a team ready to go. We looked at, the original spot we looked at was St. Paul's Church. The costs were just pretty extraordinary, and what we were trying to do with 2 Washington Street was to enter into maybe a partnership with a couple of different developers to see if we could have the Children's Museum be a part of that development. So it would be more of a commercial unit, maybe a restaurant, maybe some office space, and have the Children's Museum. Councilor Martin had mentioned before about potentially having a couple of city offices, and others have mentioned this too, about having a couple of city offices, veterans office, things of that nature that I think could be well utilized there. So we were trying to have some discussions about trying to put together a number of uses, and we thought the Children's Museum could be a great spot in that location, and that would be kind of more in the back, and then utilizing to Washington Street, the main entrance, for some other uses. So no, that's still very much in play. I'm hoping that we can continue to explore that and maybe find the right developer and right project. I would like to have the Children's Museum long term. Thank you, and I would as well. And I think the only other question I had was with regards to the PMLP site, the contaminated site. You mentioned 2 different proposals. Am I thinking about the same site? One was 16 units and then one was 8 when it went out to RFP? I thought the original one that went out, and this was, it might have been right before I became mayor or shortly thereafter, we had put out an RFP and it came back at 8. I thought it was 8 units. Kurt, do you recall, was it the original one, was it 8 or was it a duplex of 16? I should probably know this, but do you know it off the top of your head?
I thought it was 8 units. I can't be 100% sure on that, but I know the original, we had done that and had gone before the Conservation Commission.
Councilor McGinn has the answer
okay, good.
if you yield.
Councilor McGinn, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you, point of information, it was 8, definitely 8. And just as background, the reason it was 8 was there was actually a permitted project put forward through Conservation Commission for 8, and there was ultimately through that process neighborhood concurrence on that number as a reasonable scale for that location. So the number is definitely 8.
Thank you, Councilor McGinn. Councilor Turco, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mayor, I see the issue with, somebody trying to buy that property and do the cleanup and build limited to 8 units. So my question is, only because this recently came up with another parcel, was the Brownsfield revolving loan fund. Has there been any discussion or, I don't know, I guess I'm just throwing it against the wall, about the city cleaning up the property and selling it as clean property with the revolving fund, the Brownsfield fund? And I know that's limited cost. I don't know what the exact interest rate on that, but I wonder if, I'd like to see that property go, and maybe it's worth it, as you said, to sell it for minimal gain, but I think that's another one that should go up immediately and be off the city rolls with condition that, it's cleaned up in a timely fashion, so we're not stuck with another contaminated site and a developer that doesn't move forward with it. But to go back to my original question, have you ever thought about maybe the city doing the cleanup and selling it as a clean parcel, which is commonly done?
That's a great suggestion. We've had some discussion on that to see if that would be the best way for us to maximize the value. So yeah, let us work on that. I think that's a great idea. I mean, there's 3 properties in the city that drive me crazy. One of them is that 70 Endicott Street property. The other one is your favorite property, the Fine Building. And then the third one is the Marchese property up on Route 1. Those are the 3 that, you know, every time I drive by, you just get this pit in your stomach. And I'd love to get some action there. And that might be where we have to go. So let us look into that a little more seriously.
Okay, and my last question, just for my own knowledge, do you have the rent numbers for those 3 or 4 properties that you mentioned? Like specifically, do we know what is Brody's paying for a monthly rent?
I can get that to you for your next meeting. I'm not exactly sure. Let me get that to you for the next meeting, please.
Yeah, I just want to see what the rent is as opposed to what the tax, the possible tax revenue involved is. But you know, I hope it was a little bit helpful with some thoughts. But like I said, go forward with the easy ones, the single families, the Willowbray. I think you know, they fit into the neighborhoods. As far as the Kylie, I would definitely keep it, and I hope you move forward with the, or we're able to move forward with the Children's Museum at some point. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, Councilor Turco. Thank you. Mr. President, please.
Councilor Manning Martin.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mayor, for having this discussion with us this evening, having an open mind, and your willingness to listen to all our ideas. And there are definitely different opinions abound here. So, and you are the one that will ultimately put out an RFP. So I really do appreciate you listening to all of our ideas. And with that, I'll start off with the PMLP building on Endicott Street. How much are we paying in insurance for that building per year?
Can we check with Mr. Gingras if Mike knows off the top?
Mr. Gingras, please. Mike, you're muted.
Yeah, I'm unmuted, right?
Yep.
Okay. There's no insurance on the building itself. We're carry liability insurance as part of all of the properties in the city. I can't give you an exact number on it, but it would be minimal.
I'm sorry. The answer is it's minimum?
Be minimal.
There would be a minimal amount of cost for the insurance because it's part of our overall property insurance for all the properties in the city.
So it's just a part of our overall, all of our city properties are under one insurance policy, so they're not individually broken down.
Okay, but there is a figure.
Oh, yeah.
That I would think would be significant over how many years it's been sitting there. I don't know if it would be $10,000 a year. I don't know, you know. Yeah, so at this point, it's been costing us more than it's, you know, well more than it's worth to keep it on the books, just for paying for the percentage of insurance alone. So I'm all for selling that property, Mr. Mayor, to get it off the books. And it, the CPC, as has been clarified, went forward with their permitting process to renew it annually. It's been, I don't know if it's 2 or 3 years, Kurt, that you've been annually putting that permit back out for approval for the CPC. And it was for 8 units. And I believe that the size of the PMLP property at 70 Endicott Street is the exact same size as the 42 Endicott Street property. I think they're both 0.6 or 0.7 acres. And so the only issue I see there, Mayor, is depending upon what happens at 42 Endicott Street, of the same acreage, looking to put 38 or 42 or whatever the number is units on that acreage, we may have a difficult time keeping the number at the same acreage at 70 Endicott to only 8 units. And given, as you mentioned earlier, the amount that is going to have to go for cleanup for that cost. That's the only rub I see there, but I'm all for getting that PMLP off the books, out of sight. We should be filming horror movies in there. It's just frightening. So I'm all for getting that one off the books. And let's see, if we go up to Willowbray, I think I agree with Councilor O'Neill's better half to not put single housing up in open space and wooded area. I guess, would there be more, do you know, in the Willowbray property, would there be more than 8 units of single-family homes? Is it large enough for that, or would it be even smaller?
We think it's only going to be 1 or 2.
Yeah, so my thing is, and you had mentioned Governor Baker looking for housing, and he is looking for housing, and I think across the Commonwealth, we do need housing, but we don't need, $850,000, $900,000 single-family homes. That's not the type of housing that the Commonwealth and the governor are pushing for. And it also won't get us any closer to our 10%, our affordability rate that we keep getting threatened with 40Bs as of late. It will really only add, it would go in the opposite direction. But to give up wooded park space, trees for one single-family home that's probably going to go for $900,000, I'm adamantly opposed to. So I am on the opposite end of a couple of my colleagues in that regard. So I would be adamantly opposed to selling a small property, city-owned property that would be open space to single-family housing that would do nothing to assist us in getting more affordable housing. That's a statewide need and a city need, and it would have detrimental effects in the long run for us with respect to our affordable housing stock. So those are my thoughts on Willowbray and any other smaller properties that you have mentioned that would, I think, be better off maintained as open space as opposed to 1, 2, 3, 4, or even 7 single-family homes, because again, we only get an affordable unit per 8 is the baseline where our inclusionary zoning would trigger getting an affordable unit. So those are my thoughts on Willowbray. And with respect to the Kylie School, I don't know if I heard you correctly. I don't know if this was your intent, but all I could think of was if using the Kylie School for a swing school or to shuffle students around if we were to renovate, I would adamantly oppose that, simply because I have the experience from my days many years ago on the school committee, and of all the votes I took and action that the committee had taken while I was on it, that is one of my more regrettable votes and stances. Instead of us, we were talked out of getting portable units for, it was a very rational presentation at the time, and the proposal was to bus the students to the Kylie School from the Carroll when we were building the new school. And it was a disaster. The kids weren't the little children, kindergarten, first grade, were on buses for hours, and they weren't getting home in the winter till after dark. It was cold, it was dark. Parents were frightened, kids were tired. I would never advocate to do that again, and it is one of the things that I wish that we had not done. So I would advise strongly never to do that again. Kids were getting dropped off the wrong bus stops. There were just too many kids to bus, and it was just a long ride for them. And it was a very difficult time for that, for the Carroll School community at that time. So those are my thoughts on moving forward using the Kylie School in that regard. And I appreciate, Mayor, and I understand your hesitation and reluctance to hold on to that building because of the city's history. We sold some schools, and it turned out later we needed the schools. I get it. I totally get where you're coming from. And again, you're the one who has to put it up for the RFP, and I appreciate you listening to our thoughts on this. The acreage on the Kylie School is 7.7 acres, which is 3 times the size of the Berry Street property. And when you mention the Berry Street property, you mentioned that there's a lot of interest in it. If you were to mention or put out the Kylie School property, if you choose to, there would be a lot of interest in it. I know you said it was appraised at 3.1 if you sell all the fields. I'm not saying you do that. It's a wonderful soccer field. It's a great amenity up in that area. it's famous for the soccer fields. I'm not saying that you do that, but when you mentioned it was 2.6 for the school alone, I think you said, 2.6 million for the school alone. And I think if you put that up, you would get a lot of interest for residential. You would get a lot of interest, and there'd probably be a bidding war. And the amount of housing that you could put there, not suggesting it be done, I'm just throwing some ideas out here. Free thinking here, that you could take care of, or we could take care of the affordable housing at our 10% with that one project alone, because the property is so huge, to get affordable housing, meet the governor's needs, meet the state's needs, meet the city's needs, with that one property alone, instead of offering Berry Street, which is 2.7 acres in an already stressed area that we've all already indicated. It's overtaxed. There is a flood area down there. It's stressed to the max. We have the King Street unknown, 40B up the hill. It is just a distressed area that is just, it's just overpopulated. The density is just too much for the services that the city can provide. So I would not be in favor at all of offering Berry Street to go out. I would be against Berry Street for an RFP to increase the number of living units, housing and density, traffic and safety issues that would come with selling that property for that reason. So I wouldn't be in favor of Berry Street. Regarding 2 Washington Street, do we owe $450,000 as a CDC loan on that property?
We owe money on a CDC loan. I'm not sure if it's 450. I think you might be right, but I'd like to defer to Mike Gingras if he knows the number. I'm not sure.
Mr. Gingras, please.
I'm sorry, I don't know the exact amount on that loan.
It's in that ballpark, Council. I'm not sure the exact number.
And when we put it out for an RFP, did you say we sent that one out 2 times? And how much was the last one did it go out for with no bidders? What's the price?
We put out, and I'm going to look for some help from my colleague, but I was going to say 850, but I.
Okay. Well, okay. So, needless to say, we didn't get any bites because there's some issues with the building, as you've explained. I would be in favor of selling to Washington. And again, I think that everybody's heart was in the right place, and everybody did what they thought was right with that building and throughout the process, everyone involved. It just didn't work out. We did the best we could. Sometimes that happens. But we do owe money on that property that we have to pay that loan back. I think it is $450,000. I'm willing to put that one out again for an RFP and see what you can do and get it off our books. And hopefully we can maintain with your RFP the facade and, you know, maybe get the veterans offices in there and things like that. So I would encourage your movement in that regard to try and make that happen. And I think finally, 10 Lowell Street, I would concur with Councilor Sasslaw. We have a buyer for that property, chomping at the bit. He's the present owner, and we've lost so many throughout the state. Restaurants are closing down, and Brody's instead looks to me like it's doing even better, being innovative and working with the city with outdoor dining. And we've had Kelly's Square Pub closed down. What else closed down? Z-Woo's, but that was prior to COVID. And I think we lost another one downtown too, but I just don't recall. But, you know, we need the foot traffic. Boston, all of Boylston Street is closing down because there is no foot traffic. They're not feeding off one another, popular pubs and restaurants anymore, as Council Sasslaw has indicated. Yet we have one downtown that is a draw. It is bringing people in. They've done a wonderful job with the outdoor seating. And if someone's willing to buy it, I think we should be willing to again, get it off our books, get it, the meals tax. I wouldn't want to see Brody's leave. The meals tax alone on that building is, it's got to be, I don't know, how much, does anyone know how much meals tax that restaurant brings in per year? 90,000? I'm just spitballing.
We could
Anybody?
find that out pretty quickly.
Yeah, so we don't want to lose that. And again, if we lose Brody's, then Stanzi's is going to get hurt. And again, people are closing down. And La Siesta needs some help as well. And given COVID, I think we need to do everything that we can to help these businesses survive. That's, you know, that's just one of the buildings that I think the intention, even long ago, Mayor, I think you and I are probably the only ones around. I think it was when you first became mayor, the idea was to buy 10 and 12, was the Codia building number 12, and you know, the Banda brothers wanted to bring a boutique hotel, and I think also there was a garage included on that, so the two properties were to be purchased, knocked down, and be part of a garage, and the whole area was going to revolve around that idea. And it was visionary, and it was a great idea, and I was behind you 100%, and I wish it worked. Again, all the best intentions, sometimes they don't work out. That business, individuals didn't produce, let's just put it that way. And so now we're left, we have to roll with the punches. So yes, I supported the Codia building. That must have been, how long have you been mayor? 8 years now? Yeah, about, 8, 9 years ago. But things have changed, and things have changed drastically, and now we have COVID. I know you said it was a unanimous vote, and I'm sure it was. I was not present that evening for to sell 10 Lowell Street, which is where Brody's is, and had I been present, and I would have said the same thing, that I wasn't in favor. But I'm adamantly now, given COVID and our financial predicament we're in, and we need revenue, and we need to save downtown more so than we ever have before, that I'm really strongly suggesting to you that you sell 10 Lowell Street. I don't know whether by auction or by RFP. I leave that to you on your best judgment. I know Council Sassler suggested an auction. I don't have any input in that regard, but I strongly suggest that if somebody wants to buy that building and help us maintain the livelihood of downtown, I think we should strike quickly and sell 10 Lowell Street. So with that, Mayor, again, I appreciate your open-mindedness and allowing us to share our ideas, and I yield the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Manning Martin. Mr. President, please.
Councilor McGinn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Mr. Mayor, for being here tonight, running down this list. Several of these properties are in Ward 2, so I obviously have strong feelings about many of them. I know the intent tonight is really to not to delve into tremendous detail, so try to keep it at the higher level. But, you know, from a financial perspective, I think Councilor Melville, Councilor Rossignol alluded to the fact, and you've kind of confirmed with respect to CPC, you know, and we need to understand that if there's any action taken on any of these particular properties, you know, what would actually happen with the money? You know, are we paying back loans? That was brought up. Are we reverting money back to the CPC or other pockets of money where grants involved in any of them and so forth? So that's a level of detail that is going to matter a great deal in terms of this potentially ever having any impact on the general fund. Just to pick off a couple of these, 70 Endicott, which is the on the list as the former PMLP property, as I mentioned there earlier when I asked for clarification on the project, that was a 2014 permitted project. That property is directly adjacent to the flood zone, and that was designed in a way that it could coexist with that, and again with a density that was in contrast to what we saw with the neighbors on the more recent proposal for Endicott Street. This one was accepted by the neighbors after they came to understand what this could do in terms of cleaning up the site and so forth. I think Councilor Turco mentioned his comments. He's not here right at the moment. But his point about the cleanup money there is key, and I think you've kind of confirmed that, Mr. Mayor. That the site has PCB contaminants. That it's complicated in terms of the city being able to clean it up and access funding because of how we could be considered the offending party when in fact I would argue that existed prior to the city's involvement in that property with the former owner, which was in fact PMLP. I think really the action there, as Councilor Turco had suggested, is to really focus on what we could do as a city to separate ourselves from the original offending party, and it created the contamination situation there, and pursue funding to clean it up, and go after the 8-unit permitted project that exists there. That way we would have the promise of using outside money to pay for the extensive cleanup and still see money coming in as revenue to the city versus immediately turning around and spending that on cleanup. In terms of the Kylie, again, this is another one that Councilor Melville alluded to, and you mentioned in your comments about our involvement with the Lowell School Building Committee. There is, I agree, Mr. Mayor, there's a lot of moving parts there. I think we need to be careful with that one in terms of understanding how this is all going to play out over the next probably couple of years to get a clearer picture. The Center School and the Welsh, clearly active now, are going to contribute to clearing up that picture here over the next probably year and a half. As far as 10 Lowell Street goes, I personally think that the original intent there was correct. I think that as it's pouring out, I can hear it out there right now, flood mitigation was absolutely central to that whole issue. So I don't think that retaining the building there long-term is the right move. I would like to see Brody's. I think they do have a place in the downtown. I know they've tried to explore alternatives. I think a couple of those, or at least one, is still a potential active alternative. I think as far as the plan for the 10 Lowell Street property, I would certainly advocate for sticking with the original plan. Just as a point of clarification to a comment, Mr. Chairman, through you to Councilor Sasslaw.
Yes, Council.
Thank you. Councilor Sasslaw, I think you mentioned or you asked a question about auction, which I think was a great question, but then you mentioned the auction downtown, and I think you were referring to 1 Main Street. That was a bank auction the city didn't auction that property, the bank auctioned it, and the city's role in it was to get the CDA loan paid back. So, but it was not the city that took that action. So you may have understood that, but I just to clarify for those that might have been listening. And then with respect to Washington Street, again, as has been said tonight, you know, I think that unfortunately the pandemic created kind of a hiatus in the whole Children's Museum initiative, but I still see that as quite viable, and would hate to see us lose our long-term vision for those properties and the potential for economic development that a entity such as that could have for that end of the downtown. And then just lastly, on 5 Berry Street, there was a question about the zoning, and I'm not sure that that was answered correctly. The zoning there is actually R2, so to the extent that factors into anybody's thinking on that property, you know, that would probably preclude any high-density residential development there, unless, of course, it was some put out as like a friendly 40B type arrangement. But by right, I believe it's R2 zoning. Again, Mr. Mayor, thank you. In the interest of time, we're running late on this meeting, and we have a finance meeting to do still prior to the main council meeting. So I'll end it there. But again, thank you for being here tonight and filling us in on a lot of the background and current thinking with respect to these properties. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilor McGinn. Mr. President, please.
Councilor Welton.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for coming in front of us tonight. Just for a few points of clarification for my own edification, just wanted to confirm there's no intention to expand this list further, correct? The list of properties that we're considering at this point?
No, I was kind of looking through it. Those are the ones that have been in heavy discussion or heavy consideration. You know, the next page has some other properties, I guess, that are potential, but these are the ones we've been focusing on.
Okay, great, thank you. The second point I had is just procedurally, and again, I apologize, I'm not as familiar procedurally with the RFP process as most of my fellow councilors might be, but would we have an opportunity to look at what's in the RFP before that goes live and maybe make some suggestions for restrictions that we would want included? Could you maybe just walk through how that procedure would work for the RFP process?
Yeah, the RFP comes from my office after work with the community development and Dan Doucette, our purchasing agent, and Mike Gingras. Yeah, no, but I'm certainly welcome to any suggestions or any thoughts. That would be very helpful. I mean, at the end of it, that's my responsibility is to put it out and make the final decisions, but any thoughts you may have on that or anything you'd like to see, I would welcome that.
Great, thank you. And then just another quick question. On the Kylie School, I certainly understand the hesitancy to sell the building. You know, the population in the city obviously is growing exponentially. And with that, you know, down the road, there might be a need for additional school space. Has there been any thought to maybe modeling out what the population growth might dictate for the need of a school? Maybe it's 5 years out, 7 years out, and then potentially, I know that the city doesn't want to be in the role of being a landlord, but potentially leasing that space, either for, you know, retail or commercial use in the, you know, 5 to 7 year term to allow us to keep the property, should we need to revert back to school, but have some flexibility and generate some income?
I think that's a good suggestion. That is something I think we can look at. Our models that we've done, and we're continually doing models both as a city, and then the state also kind of provides some information on some models they do, that we're looking at a slight bump in our population. I think the fact that we invested in the Higgins Middle School with the new school, that certainly made us attractive, and has been said by Council Saslar and others, we've become a real hotspot in terms of homes being purchased and people looking at Peabody. So the models that we have right now show a slight increase in population, and both population as a whole and in population in our students.
And I definitely, I think it's a wise move to probably not get rid of that building if that's the consideration that we might need additional school space, and we don't have that situated yet. And I know the construction or possible construction with the Welch School and the Center School, still kind of up in the air with if that will meet the need. So I certainly understand that reservation to get rid of the building, but I would be interested in potentially looking at if there's a way for that building to generate income over the not necessarily short term, but keep it for the city to use as a way to potentially lease out the space. And then just a quick comment, I agree with what Councilor Melville and Councilor McGinn had mentioned. I think as we decide if some of these properties should be sold, it'll be important to articulate exactly where we anticipate that money going. We don't want to, in my opinion, we don't want to just be selling a property and say, okay, well, we need the money, it's COVID, we're going to be short revenue next year. I think everybody understands that, but if we can speak with specificity in terms of what needs, that revenue generated from each of those property sales is going to help to address, I think you'll have a lot more public support from the front end. So that's it for me, but thank you very much for taking the time to walk through this with all of us.
Thank you, Councilor Welton. Mr. President, please.
Councilor Shiras.
Thank you. Thank you, Council President, through the chair. When I first spoke, I wasn't really, I guess I didn't get the understanding that the mayor was looking for major feedback, and I think you've gotten a lot of it. And I will just start off with the Kennedy, coming from the school committee, like others here on this council. I'll be real frank. Good luck getting that out of the school committee's hands. I do not see them turning that over to surplus property. So I think you're kidding yourselves if you think that's a real quick chance, because quite honestly, when I sat on the school committee now over 6 years ago, I was involved in a committee. I think Tom Rosenau was involved in the committee, and the committee went so far back that Ann Martin was involved in the redistricting committee on that. And I would tell you, I wouldn't think anything of doing anything with that property until that redistricting plan comes back out and comes to fruit, and move on that, because I think you're going to see that you're definitely going to need that property for one reason or another. And again, when I was on that committee probably 7 to 8 years ago, we did have a study done on the population. And it was funny because that study came in and said, we're going to take a dip, and we're going to take quite a big dip in school-age population and numbers of people here in the city. Within 2 years, we're above what we started at. It never dipped. It went up, and it's going to continue to go up. So my thoughts on that is, to keep that property. It has a wonderful softball field behind there that our schools used. It is known for that field for softball, and that parking lot is used, again, for people going to the games. And this pandemic will end at some point, and people will go back and watch sporting events of their children playing, if it's a high school or if it's a local in the city league. The one other thing I like to think about developing Peabody is more on redeveloping Peabody, redeveloping property that's no longer being used at a developed state. Not interested in developing wooded areas or park areas or things of that nature. I've heard it many, many times through the last few years, is that we're overdeveloping Peabody. So to take land that's wooded or a park, potentially to be a park, and develop it, I think we're not listening to our constituents. That's just my opinion. But again, to develop property that has had a prior use of a commercial or a residential or something, absolutely. I was kind of surprised when I heard we're talking about 10 Main Street. Last conversations I had was that there was no intention of selling that property. Hey, we all love the establishment that's there now. We all do. We love it. We did a lot of work to try to keep them in Peabody, and we want to do that. I just want to warn people. There's no guarantee that that property, that owner, will be the one that ends up buying that property. And I would strongly suggest we go to our city solicitor and ask, before we do the RFP, before we get invested in that, what is our obligations? Because when we make a commitment, I'm one, and that was a good plan. It was a very, very good plan to what we need to do, and I think it's still viable, that we want to make sure that we do everything right. Absolutely everything right, but also keep in mind, there is no guarantees. I know in the past couple years, people have asked me that they were interested in buying that property. And it wasn't the owner of that business right now. So I want people to be very, very cautious as what direction we go and what our intentions would be, because it may not be what we're planning it. And the other thing is, my financial planner has told me right now, do not sell. Don't sell anything. This is not the time to sell. Wait. So I know we like to have some income coming in, and I know we like to, offset our tax rates, and we need to do that, but I don't think we should be really thinking of selling everything off just to make some money right now, because we have some many, many years down the line that, again, when the city, before I was here, sold a school that we didn't think we were going to need. And I think, Mayor Bencourt, you can count many times how many times that came back and kind of wish we kept that building and held it on for other use in the schools. Again, I think with that being said, I just want to make sure we all understand what we're looking to do. I still believe the Betancourt building can be developed. We want to make sure we will follow through that plan. But I also think it's very important for anything that goes in there, if it's commercial, a restaurant, or anything, the museum, that church parking lot is going to be needed to have that thrive. So if we're going to sell that church and the church parking lot, we may be, we can't get any more property down there for parking. And I think we're showing people there is parking downtown, and to get rid of that to a private use is maybe kicking ourselves in the butt later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Sharris. Mr. President, please.
Further questions, I'll turn it over to the chairman, Councilor Gould.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to thank everybody. Great input. I have one comment, if I may. There's a number of items, and I'm not going to go into it, but if we have open space, let's leave it as open space. That's my one comment, such as Willowbray Park. And I would not do the Kylie School. I would not sell it. I would hold it for future generations, because we never know what we may need in some school settings. So that being said, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Very helpful, very insightful. I hope all the councilors were satisfied with question and answers that went back and forth. If I may, could I have a motion to adjourn, please?
So moved.
You heard Councilor McGinn. Roll call vote, please.
Councilors Charis. Yes. O'Neill.
Yes.
Melville.
Yes.
McGinn.
Yes.
Gould.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Council. It was a great discussion. Thank you.